Also, before I start, I'm letting these guys roam around while I film, so if you hear a couple meows that I can't edit out, that's why. Okay, babies, you can go.
Before I start, I am going to suggest watching my previous video about decolonizing our understanding of nature. Otherwise, this one might be a little bit confusing. I'm going to try my best to re-explain some things along the way, but no promises. TLDR, we are deeply interconnected with all living things in one global ecology, and we cannot continue to think of ourselves as separate from nature or the environment. But today I want to talk specifically about how that way of thinking has manifested itself in our conservation techniques. And when I say the word conservation, I'm willing to bet most of you think of national parks or wildlife reserves of some kind. Somewhere that people are not allowed to live in order to protect wildlife, but is open to tourists and researchers in a limited capacity. This style of conservation is often referred to as fortress conservation, or sometimes the nature island concept, wherein you build a fortress of sorts with defined boundaries, oftentimes fences, and nature is distinctly separated from society. Fortress conservation is rooted in this understanding that humans are the problem. Excluding us from nature is an action taken for its own protection. And an area's natural state is understood as what it looked like before humans interfered. So many air quotes. And to be fair, this isn't entirely wrong. We've screwed up a lot of shit by interfering in the natural process of things, but to think of the most natural state of an ecosystem as lacking people is to ignore the fact that humans are a part of nature, not separate from it. Again, might be helpful to watch a previous video. Fortress conservation also often involves the state asserting control over the area, often dispossessing local or indigenous communities who live there. States do this through scientific and technical acts of surveying and inventorying, zoning and mapping the biological resources of an area, thereby enclosing them and transferring control of those resources over to the state. There are examples of this all over the world, probably most famously in the Amazon and East Africa, where this Western idea of conservation came in with colonization and pushed indigenous communities off of their land. Many of these conflicts are ongoing as those communities continue to struggle without their traditional livelihoods and without support for their land rights. The reality is that often indigenous people's lifestyles, livelihoods, cultures, and religions have adapted over hundreds or thousands of years to the unique ecological conditions of the region that they're in, so that both the people and the environment end up supporting each other in that lovely interconnected ecosystem. For example, in Sri Lanka, the amount of conflict between people and elephants has been increasing lately as large-scale monocropping has limited elephant habitat, resulting in more and more human and elephant deaths. There are several reserves on the island, but it turns out that restricting elephants to smaller areas just leads to the degradation of those grasslands and forests because elephants end up eating and trampling faster than the plants can regenerate. Also, Asian elephants prefer to graze on the edge of forests or in young forests, so they have access to a mix of lush grasses and trees to eat. In the reserves, trees aren't allowed to be cut, resulting in more and more mature forest with little grass, thus limiting the elephant's diet. This basically means that restricting elephants to reserves will eventually starve them to death, and has in cases caused extinction. In contrast, the traditional way of life in pre-colonization Sri Lanka involved very little conflict between humans and wildlife. Instead of feared, elephants were highly respected. Villages maintained reservoirs or watering holes to irrigate their crops and for their livestock to drink, but wildlife also often drank from them. To protect the village from elephants and other wildlife, the area between the village and the reservoir was planted with fruit trees and coconut trees and other tall perennials, all of which were cultivated to maturity to discourage wildlife from... Are you okay, baby? to discourage wildlife from attacking people. And they also practiced shifting cultivation, which is a type of farming where an area of forest is cleared, cultivated for 1 to 2 years, and then left to regenerate for 3 to 10 years. This meant that there was consistent access to forest edges and young forests for elephants once the people finished cultivating. Cutting down those trees actually enriched the habitat for elephants. Whereas modern agriculture is more spread out, shifting cultivation is also often practiced in clusters, which is easier for elephants to navigate around, as opposed to trampling through someone's farm no matter which way they turn. Another great example is the savannas of East Africa. When colonizers first arrived to the region, they saw the plains scattered with clusters of trees and assumed that the area used to be a great forest, but that the local people had degraded it and cut all the trees down. When in fact, the opposite was true. So without humans, there probably wouldn't be very many trees at all, because settlements were often surrounded by a tight circle of trees that were intentionally planted as both protection from wildlife and sources of fruit and nuts and other forest products. Even when the settlement is abandoned, the plants and animals left behind continue to thrive and provide habitat for other organisms. So yeah, if it weren't for these people planting trees to protect their homes, there probably wouldn't be like any trees in the savanna. Also, pastoral livestock grazing is an ancient practice in this region, and it has stuck for a reason. It works for everybody. There are plenty of grasses available to graze livestock, which provide a consistent source of food for humans in a dry region where farming is often difficult and unreliable. These grasses are also difficult for wildlife to digest, but livestock, such as cattle, are ruminants, meaning they have a unique digestive system that allows them to break down and digest the grasses. The livestock in turn leave behind poop, which fertilizes the soils and allows other vegetation with greater nutritional value and is easier to digest to grow, which then benefits the wildlife. In fact, it has been found that wildlife follow herds of livestock around. In this way, the system allows all three, people, livestock, and wildlife, to thrive. But modern conservation areas and modern agriculture are increasingly restricting the movement of all three by either pushing people or wildlife out of specific areas and or erecting fences. This creates zones for human living and developments, ranches for livestock, and reserves for wildlife. But this separation of one ecosystem into three different parts ends up hurting everybody. So in summary, forest conservation has three main problems. First, ecological limitations. For many ecosystems, the removal of people and or restriction of wildlife is harmful to the very nature it is designed to protect. Second, the othering of nature. Thinking of environment and nature as separate from human society and civilization blatantly ignores the deep interconnectedness of the global ecosystem. We must decolonize our relationship with nature. And third, the disenfranchisement and disempowerment of local and indigenous peoples. Aside from literally ignoring indigenous land rights and stripping away traditional livelihoods, the conversation around conservation reinforces unequal power relations by privileging the knowledge, authority, and worldview of Western NGOs and conservation biologists. This is why it is simply not good enough to be an environmental activist. Environmental justice is the only way we will survive the climate and ecological crisis, because it is deeply intertwined with systems of racism, white supremacy, and privilege. I know learning about this stuff and being confronted with difficult realities can be very uncomfortable, so thank you for making it all the way to the end of this video. It is so incredibly important that we do the work to be good advocates and allies. As a reward, here is a video of my foster kitten riding the vacuum. As always, links to more information, references, and articles will be in the description if you want to learn more. If you want to learn more about systemic change and environmental justice, subscribe to this channel and give my other videos a watch. My main mission with this channel is to reach as many people as possible with this information so that we can work towards systemic change together. So please share this video or talk about these issues with your friends and family. I don't care which. You can also support me by liking and commenting or following me on Instagram and Twitter, which will be linked in the description. Thanks. Bye.